April 1945. The war is over. Germany has fallen. The gates of hell are opening. British soldiers move through the ruins of a place the world had never truly imagined, Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. The smell hits first. Not gunpowder. Not smoke. Thousands of bodies lie scattered in the mud. Survivors, barely alive, stare with hollow eyes. The British cameramen keep filming. The world will need proof. And then, they see her. Not hiding. Not running. Not begging. Standing in uniform, boots polished, hair perfectly styled, 22-year-old Irma Grese. She does not look like a monster. She looks like someone's daughter. But survivors whisper her name like a curse. The hyena. They say she laughed while women were beaten. They say she selected prisoners for the gas chambers with a flick of her riding crop. They say dogs obeyed her more kindly than she treated human beings. And now, she is in British custody. No screaming. No tears. Just a cold stare. How does a young farm girl become one of the most feared female guards of the Holocaust? Was she a sadist? A fanatic? Or something even more disturbing, completely ordinary? Tonight we step into the shadows of the camps. From her childhood in rural Germany, to the gates of Auschwitz concentration camp, to the courtroom that would decide her fate. This is not just a story about evil. It's a story about how easily it can grow. Rise of Irma Grese, from farm girl to camp guard. Before the nickname. Before the trials. Before the noose. There was just a girl. A childhood in broken Germany. Irma Grese was born on October 7, 1923, in a small farming community in northeastern Germany. Her father was a strict dairy farmer. Her mother struggled with depression and eventually took her own life when Irma was still young. Germany in the 1920s and early 1930s was unstable, humiliated, and angry. The Treaty of Versailles had crushed national pride. Jobs were scarce. Inflation had wiped out savings. Many families, especially in rural areas, looked for someone, to blame. That someone became the Nazis. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, he didn't just promise jobs. He promised pride, strength, a future. Young people were especially targeted. Irma joined the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. There she was taught discipline, obedience, racial ideology, and absolute loyalty to the Reich. The message was simple. Germany must be purified. Enemies must be removed. Sacrifice is noble. And Irma listened. A hunger for more. Irma did not want to be a farm girl forever. She wanted importance. Records suggest she tried to become a nurse, possibly dreaming of a respectable career. But she lacked qualifications and discipline. School reports described her as average at best. Then came an opportunity. The SS was expanding its camp system as war intensified. Women were needed as guards in concentration camps holding female prisoners. The job came with a uniform, authority, status, power. And in Nazi Germany, power was intoxicating. In 1942, at just 18 years old, Irma volunteered for service at the Ravensbrück women's concentration camp. Ravensbrück, the beginning. Ravensbrück concentration camp was designed primarily for female prisoners, political dissidents, resistance fighters, Jews, Roma, and others labeled undesirable. Here Irma began her training. Former prisoners would later testify that new guards were taught not empathy, but dominance. They were encouraged to maintain fear. Any kindness was weakness. Punishments were public. Irma quickly stood out. Not for mercy. For enthusiasm. Witnesses would later describe her as ambitious, eager to impress superiors. She reportedly volunteered for harsher duties. She learned how to conduct roll calls that lasted hours. She learned how to wield a whip. More importantly, she learned that cruelty brought recognition. Transferred to Auschwitz. In 1943, Irma was transferred to a place that would define her legacy. Auschwitz concentration camp. By then, Auschwitz was not just a camp. It was an industrial killing center. Trains arrived daily. Prisoners were sorted within minutes. Some sent to forced labor. Others sent directly to gas chambers. Selections required guards. Witnesses later testified that Irma Grese participated in these selections, standing beside SS doctors, pointing left or right. Life or death. Survivors claimed she carried a braided whip and sometimes a pistol. Some said she set her trained dogs on prisoners. Others described beatings for minor infractions, or no reason at all. It is important to note, not every story can be verified independently. War crimes trials relied heavily on survivor testimony. But what is consistent across dozens of accounts is this. Her name inspired fear. She was only 20 years old. The making of the hyena. Nicknames in camps were not given lightly. Prisoners called her the hyena. What? Some said it was her laughter during punishments. Others said it was the way she prowled the camp yards. Some claimed it was the chilling smile during selections. She reportedly developed a close working relationship with Joseph Kramer, later commandant of Bergen-Belsen. We'll return to him later. Unlike older guards hardened by years of war, Irma represented something different: youth embracing brutality. That unsettled even fellow SS members. Promotions followed. Increased responsibility. More authority over prisoners. The transformation was complete. The farmer's daughter had become a senior SS overseer at one of history's most notorious killing centers. The collapse of the Reich. By early 1945, the war was turning violently against Germany. The Soviet army advanced from the east. Camps in Poland were evacuated. Prisoners were forced on brutal death marches westward. Irma was transferred again, this time to Bergen-Belsen. Conditions there were catastrophic. Overcrowding. Starvation. Typhus outbreaks. Mass graves. By April 1945, the camp was collapsing under its own horror. When British forces approached, some SS fled. Irma did not. On April 15, 1945, British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen. They found over 10,000 unburied bodies. And among the captured guards stood Irma Grese, 22 years old. Witnesses noted her calm demeanor. Even slight arrogance. The British began gathering evidence almost immediately. Film crews documented everything. Survivors gave statements. The world would soon see what had happened behind the barbed wire. And Irma Grese would face justice. This concludes main body. The arrest. April 15, 1945. British troops of the 11th Armored Division move through the gates of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. What they find is beyond war, beyond combat, beyond anything military training had prepared them for. Piles of corpses. Starving survivors too weak to stand. Disease spreading uncontrollably. The guards are rounded up. Among them, Irma Grese. She is ordered into a group of captured SS personnel. Photographs show her standing upright, hands behind her back, expression unreadable. No visible panic. No breakdown. British officers later remarked on her composure. She did not appear ashamed. She did not beg for mercy. She followed orders calmly, now receiving them instead of giving them. Within days, the British forced captured guards, including Grese, to help bury the dead. They were made to carry bodies into mass graves. Cameramen recorded everything. For the first time, the world would see what the camps looked like. And the guards who ran them. Building the case. The British quickly began collecting testimonies from survivors. The scale of horror required accountability. Irma Grese's name surfaced again and again. Witnesses accused her of participating in selections for gas chambers at Auschwitz concentration camp, beating prisoners with a whip, setting dogs on inmates, shooting at prisoners, showing particular cruelty toward young women. It is important to understand the context of these accusations. Survivors were traumatized. Many had lost entire families. Memories came through pain and grief. But what stood out to investigators was consistency. Different prisoners, from different blocks, described similar behavior. Grese denied the worst of it. She admitted to being a guard. She denied deliberate murder. She claimed she was following orders. The Belsen trial. In September 1945, the British military court opened proceedings in Lüneburg, Germany. This would become known as the Belsen trial. 45 defendants stood accused of war crimes committed at Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. Among them were senior SS officials, including Joseph Kramer, and several female guards. Grese was the youngest defendant in the courtroom. The prosecution argued that guards were not passive administrators. They were active participants in a system of abuse and extermination. When Grese entered the courtroom, observers were struck by the contrast. She looked young, almost fragile. But the charges were monstrous. Inside the courtroom atmosphere was tense, crowded with journalists, survivors, and military officials. The world wanted answers. Survivors took the stand. They described roll calls lasting hours in freezing temperatures, random beatings, women collapsing from exhaustion and being kicked, selections where a simple gesture decided life or death. Several specifically pointed to Grese. One survivor testified that Grese seemed to take pleasure in punishment. Another claimed she carried a plated whip and used it frequently. Grese remained composed during testimony. When questioned, she stated, "She never killed anyone. She never personally selected prisoners for death. She followed instructions given by superiors. Her defense centered on obedience. I was only following orders." It was a phrase that would echo across many post-war trials. But the prosecution pushed back. They argued that cruelty was not required by duty, it was chosen. The image that shocked the world. Photographs from the trial spread through newspapers across Europe and America. A young blonde woman in the dock. Headphones over her ears to hear translation. Expression steady. The public struggled with what they were seeing. How could someone so young commit such acts? Some newspapers sensationalized her, calling her the blonde beast, or reviving the camp nickname, the Hyena of Auschwitz. Others saw something more disturbing. Not a monster. A human being capable of monstrous behavior. Psychological questions. Even during the trial, observers debated. Was she sadistic by nature? Radicalized by ideology? Or shaped entirely by the Nazi system? Unlike older defendants, Grese had grown up under Nazi rule. She had been indoctrinated as a teenager. The regime had shaped her worldview before adulthood. But indoctrination alone could not explain specific acts of cruelty described in court. The judges had to decide not why she became who she was, but whether she was guilty under the law. The verdict. On November 17, 1945, the verdicts were delivered. Several defendants received prison sentences. 11 were sentenced to death. Among them, Joseph Kramer and Irma Grese. She was 22 years old. The sentence, death by hanging. Observers reported that she showed little visible emotion when the verdict was read. No collapse. No hysteria. Just a tight expression and silence. The final days. Irma Grese was transferred to Hamelin prison in Germany to await execution. The executioner appointed was Albert Pierre Point, Britain's chief hangman. He later wrote about the experience in his memoirs. According to Pierre Point, Grese remained composed in her final hours. On December 13, 1945, she was led to the gallows. Witnesses reported her final word was a single command in German. Schnell. Quick. The trapdoor opened. At 22 years old, Irma Grese became one of the youngest women executed under British law in the 20th century. The trapdoor opened. And just like that, it was over. No dramatic confession. No apology. No final explanation. At 22 years old, Irma Grese was gone. But her name did not disappear with her. It lingered. The uncomfortable truth. History often paints evil with obvious colors. Sharp teeth. Wild eyes. Unmistakable cruelty. But Irma Grese did not look like that. She looked ordinary. And that is what unsettles people most. Because if evil had a clear face, we could recognize it instantly. We could avoid it. We could fight it. But what if it doesn't? What if it looks like youth? Like ambition? Like someone seeking purpose in a broken world? A product of her time, or something more? Grese grew up under the shadow of Adolf Hitler. She was shaped by propaganda, nationalism, and racial ideology. The system rewarded loyalty and punished doubt. Compassion was weakness. Obedience was survival. But thousands of young Germans were raised in the same system. Not all became camp guards. Not all embraced brutality. So where does responsibility lie? Was she a true believer? A sadist empowered by uniform and authority? Or simply someone who discovered that power felt good, and never questioned it? The court judged her actions. History continues to judge her legacy. The weight of testimony. Survivors who spoke during the Belsen trial carried memories heavier than any courtroom verdict. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, the world finally saw what had been hidden behind barbed wire. Mass graves. Starvation. Disease. And the faces of those who enforced it. For survivors, the trial was not just about punishment. It was about acknowledgement. Recognition that what they endured was real. That the world would not deny it. Irma Grese became one of the symbols of that accountability. The danger of simplifying evil. It is easy to turn her into a myth. The Hyena of Auschwitz. The blonde beast. Nicknames create distance. They turn human beings into creatures. Monsters. But that distance can be dangerous. Because if we believe only monsters commit atrocities, we fail to see how systems, ideology, and ordinary people can combine to create horror. At Auschwitz concentration camp, cruelty was bureaucratic. Organized. Documented. People filled out forms. Stamped papers. Followed procedures. The machinery of death did not operate on rage alone. It operated on routine. Irma Grese was one small but visible part of that machinery. Why her story still matters. Nearly a century later, historians still study figures like Grese, not to sensationalize them but to understand them. How does indoctrination work? How does authority reshape morality? How does ambition twist under extremist ideology? These are not questions locked in the past. They are warnings. Because the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with language, with dehumanization, with small steps normalized over time. By the time the gates of Auschwitz closed behind millions, the moral collapse had already happened long before. A final reflection. Irma Grese's life was short. From rural farm girl, to SS guard, to defendant, to execution chamber. 22 years. Some will always see her as pure evil. Others will see her as a tragic product of a radicalized society. But perhaps the more important question is not what she was, but what allowed her to become it. History does not preserve her story for shock value. It preserves it as a mirror, a reminder of what happens when hatred becomes policy, when obedience replaces conscience, when young minds are shaped by propaganda instead of empathy. The gates remain. Today, the grounds of Auschwitz concentration camps stand as a memorial. Visitors walk past barracks. They read names etched in stone. They see photographs of faces that never grew old. The silence there is heavy. And somewhere in the long list of perpetrators recorded in history, the name Irma Grese remains. Not as legend, not as myth, but as evidence. Evidence of what humans can do to one another when ideology erases compassion. The trapdoor fell in 1945. But the lesson did not end there. Because the most frightening truth is this. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes, it simply obeys.